And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers at the temples of his gods?
We look at the generational planets and dissect them. So Pluto in Capricorn, what does that mean? Pluto in Capricorn, Pluto is transforming, or it's natural selection's best friend. It basically does population control with disease. It helps to dissolve or, in some terms, annihilate unnecessary things or things that would not survive. Then we look into Capricorn. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. Saturn is conservative, restrictive, disciplined, and also because of the time of year of Capricorn, because we're looking at this from a generational standpoint, it's the prime time when people start getting sick, when everything's frozen over, and so we would be purging. Purging would also be a verb that you could attribute to Pluto as well as Capricorn. Capricorn, from the medical perspective, it represents the bones, the structure, cartilage. So if you were to translate that to a more mundane concept, it is the foundation, it is the core. It would be the structure of the third house, for example. Third house is like your immediate community, neighborhoods, etc., etc. It would be roadways, highways, interstates. It's going to be testing it, because Saturn is the great teacher. So it's going to be saying, okay, you guys didn't do this right. So me and Pluto here are going to purge this roadway by completely eroding it. There's obviously other influences that play into how it eroded. Because if it eroded because there was an accident, for example, was a complete collapse of a bridge because a semi driver went in the wrong lane and it wasn't tall enough and he completely collapsed the whole thing, that's his fault. So those will have personal planets involved because it was a microcosmic event that influenced the macrocosmic themes. And if it was weather phenomenons, then there would likely be Uranus involved, or Neptune, or even depending on what where they're placed at, it could be Jupiter or Chiron. So Pluto in Capricorn is going to be purging anything basically not done the Saturnian way, not done the right way. And there is obviously a little bit of a fixed ideation with that, because Pluto is ruled by Scorpio, that's a fixed sign, and Capricorn is, although it's a cardinal sign, it's very rigid and uncooperative. So there's going to be a lot of narrow-minded events that will be inspired by this. So what I mean is that whatever is purged by Pluto and Capricorn might end up being replaced with something that isn't actually better. For example, there's a lot of shootings. Instead of figuring out the best way to prevent shootings, they think that if they just remove the guns themselves, that will fix the problem. That is not going to be a better solution. Next one we have is Neptune. So Neptune in general has no bounds, no limits. Just think of water. Just a fluid liquid, has no structure. It doesn't understand the concept of discipline. It doesn't understand the concept of beginning and ending. It is continuous. So that's also why it's associated with spirituality and simulation, and why people who have prominent Neptune signatures usually have some sort of schizophrenia or identity disorder or something like that. Because they can't establish who they are, what they're here for, and give themselves goals to obtain to be who I want to be kind of thing, because they can't even fucking figure out where they started in the first place. So Neptune is intuition, and it is the fluid current that continues to move all with the other generational planets. Uranus has a couple of different dualities. From an evolutionary astrology perspective, it represents enlightenment and trauma. From a mundane perspective, it It influences unpredictable, abnormal, and it also represents innovation. Aries is obviously the fighter, the soldier, and is always up for confrontation, is a one-dimensional person, uses aggression and physical might to get their point across or express themselves in almost every case scenario. And so when you take the soldier and fit him into the expectations of Uranus, it would be an aggressive, combative individual that is given the authority to be unpredictable, abnormal, chaotic, rebellious, because rebellious is also associated with Uranus, and futuristic. So basically somebody who's ahead of the game with everybody else, has some inside knowledge, or is secretly coercing something like some sort of battle strategy, which would probably be a great example for that, actually, with Uranus and Aries. So then we look at Neptune and Pisces. Neptune is rules Pisces, so this is how I look at it, like a double dose of Neptune. So Pisces people is like the hippie. It's actually the sign that is represented by Jesus. So the New Testament that's passive and tells you to just chill out and love everybody. Doesn't that sound kind of like a hippie? Yeah, because that's Pisces. If there was any potential hope for any kind of discipline or structure with Neptune, that completely went out the window as soon as Pisces came into play. So, for example, if you looked at Capricorn Neptune, those are probably like the most disciplined Neptune people in existence. Besides, yeah, like mine too. I would say Virgo in Pisces, but because that's actually the polarity, essentially, with the signs, I think that cognitive dissonance would be a problem. And then we have obviously Saturn and Sagittarius, which is actually one of the planets I was thinking of that inspired me to make this video. I have Saturn and Sagittarius. As I've been seeing how it's affecting me personally, and then understanding how it's affecting the educational institutions, and then how it's affecting law and government, and then how it's affecting religion. I read before about how there's so many dimensions to astrology. Not just interpretation, but how they affect different core institutions. And obviously the more modernized and social we become, the more institutions are then pillars and foundations in our daily lives. Therefore, there's multiple different facets that astrology can now contribute to. So it's not that astrology is only for one thing. Astrology is for everything, and the fact that we continue to overcomplicate our lives, how we evolve into a more social society, we are overcomplicating everything. Therefore, astrology now becomes a complicated subject, which also explains the equal houses back in the medieval and ancient astrology practices. Simpler to read, pretty straightforward, in comparison to this, which is more complicated. I mean, even think back a couple years ago, people are insinuating that we're going to add an additional sign to things. I think that has something to do with the precession of the equinoxes, but no, we're not going to add an additional sign. We're just going to move on we're going to move on the axis instead of it being cardinals fixed. Sagittarius is obviously not an opposition, but I think that is the most unstable Saturn sign to imply, unless it was maybe Aquarius. Because Aquarius is always going to have that erratic behavior no matter where it is. So, think of it this way. Sagittarius is like the child of the fire signs. They're optimistic, they're naive, they don't understand limitations. It's not like the Piscean thing, even though funny enough, Pisces and the ancient rulers used to be associated with Jupiter, which is Sagittarius' planet. So, Jupiter's huge, it wants to go big. It doesn't ever think that there is a limit to what they can achieve. They also want the freedom and the capacity to test that theory. Therefore, they don't like to be told what to do. They don't like having, totalitarian structure and delegated and being treated like they can't decide their own potential. So, and what is Saturn? Naturally, it is the authority, the totalitarian, the father, and it is discipline, structure, limitations. If you were to imagine like a Sagittarius kid, and a really over controlling father, the relationship dynamic and the dialogue between the two would not be pretty, and it would not be productive at all. Child themselves would act more of a rebel and be volatile, either verbally, even to the point of physical aggression. Sagittarius represents obviously that child. It also represents expanding your oneself, so higher learning, knowledge. And Sagittarius being involved with Jupiter, being the god of gods, that is the original influence for Christianity. So yes, Jesus is a Pisces, but that's the New Testament, okay? So essentially Christianity nowadays would actually be based on Neptune in modern translations. Jupiter was around right before there was a Reformation, an addition to the First Testament or the Old Testament. It resembles the Church of Peter. It wants to do good for all men and thinks that it knows best. And that's the problem with humanity in general. When something thinks it knows best, regardless if it's a person, whatever, that's when issues come up. Because then they start to impose their preferences and their choices onto other people, and in the guise that they're doing what's best for them. And the problem is that there's not one answer or one solution to every problem. So that's why trying to look at this concept that the sky's the limit, let people figure it out on their own, and people will cope or resolve it or change it in their own way. And that's basically what's going on with society across the board.